Okay, are we all ready? Hello, everyone. Oops. And good afternoon. I'm Cathy Thicke. I'm a counselor with the District of Tofino, and I'm chairing the meeting today as the acting mayor for March 2022. So I'd like to call this meeting to order at 4:30 and acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. And there's a notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. We have a recommendation that pursuant to Section 15 of the District of Tofino Meeting Procedure Bylaw, number 1229, 2016, as amended, the March 14th, have I got the wrong one? I have the wrong meeting minutes in front of me.
No, you got it right. You got it right. That's
Okay.
That's the, go ahead.
Sorry, that the March 14th, 2022, that's not right. The whole meeting be held electronically via Zoom. That is today, March 14th. Yes, sorry, and live broadcasted on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel, and that the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Municipal Hall, 161 3rd Street in Tofino, BC. So the adoption of the agenda, we have a recommendation that the March 14th, 2022 Committee of the Whole agenda be adopted. And if there's no objection, I will adopt the agenda. Seeing none, the agenda is adopted. And the 4.1, the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held January 17th, 2022. We have a recommendation that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held January 17, 2022 be adopted. If there's no objection, I would recommend that the minutes be adopted. The minutes are received and adopted. And Ms. Dempsey, do we have any public comment on the agenda items today, please?
Good afternoon, Chair Thicke. We don't currently have any requests for public comments, but I would like to remind the members of the public of this meeting that there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if you would like to submit a comment for up to 2 minutes on an agenda item, please use that button now. I will hold for about 10 seconds here if anyone would like to submit a comment on the item of agenda. I'll call a second time. And seeing no submissions, there are no comments on the agenda.
Good, thank you very much. Although I'm always sad to hear that there are no comments on the agenda item, because it is an opportunity for the public to comment on what we're about to discuss. So I encourage people in future to take that opportunity if they so wish. And we have 2 delegations today, and we'll start with 6.1, Cathy Peters, Educator, Be Amazing campaign regarding just committee presentation. So I'm presuming, Ms. Bess, that you will promote her to the host, and I would like to welcome Cathy Peters on behalf of the District of Tofino. We look forward to your presentation, and just as a reminder, please state your name and your title, and just a reminder that there is 10 minutes for your presentation. So welcome and thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. It's great to see you again. It's Cathy Peters, and I'm an educator for the Be Amazing campaign. I presented to Tofino City Council last May 25th, 2021. I described the growing problem of child sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and human sex trafficking in BC. I gave stats and solutions. Since that presentation, I have made similar presentations to BC members of Parliament, MLAs, provincial bureaucrats, city councils, regional districts, law enforcement, police boards, school boards, service clubs, universities, high schools, 2 global summits, and recently to the Federal Justice Committee. I emailed Tofino Council my presentation script to the Federal Justice Committee that is now reviewing the federal law called the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. As I mentioned last year, this law has 4 parts. Number 1, it targets the demand by criminalizing the buyers of sex and profiteers. Number 2, it recognizes the seller of sex as a victim, usually female, and is immune from prosecution. Number 3, Exit strategies are in place to assist the victim out of the sex trade. Number 4, robust prevention education and a rollout campaign so youth, children, and the vulnerable are not lured into the sex industry. The sex industry is anxious to repeal this law in order to normalize and legitimize the sex industry in Canada. It's important for every community to understand the implications of a possible repeal. The preamble of the law is important to understand because it recognizes the exploitation inherent in prostitution and the risk of violence. It identifies that social harm results from objectification of the human body and commodification of sexual activity. The clear statement from Parliament was that women and girls in Canada are not for sale, that they are full human beings with dignity and human rights. It recognized that women, girls, the marginalized, vulnerable are disproportionately represented in prostitution. The objectives of this law can be achieved with enforcement, with funding, and societal education. Meaningful implementation of PSEPA will require education to shift societal attitudes towards recognizing prostitution as inconsistent with equality and human dignity. The treatment between minors and adults in prostitution is a seamless continuum of abuse that runs from the prostituted child who, by virtue of age, is deemed incompetent to consent and progresses into an abused adult who, by virtue of conditioning, addition, and trauma, is frequently rendered equally incapable of informed and considered consent. The sex industry refers to harm reduction. However, I find no evidence that women will be safer in prostitution if the industry is regulated. Legalizing the sex industry, if we consider Germany, the Netherlands, Nevada, and New Zealand, actually increases the size and the scope of the trade, leading to more human trafficking, more involvement of organized crime, more prostitution, and more violence. To understand the sex industry, I refer to the Robert Picton case, the pig farmer who dismembered prostituted women, and in particular, Indigenous women on his Port Coquitlam farm. I do not want anyone in BC to be under the illusion as to the brutality of this industry. Harm reduction practices will not protect women from violence if the job itself represents violence. If violence is central to the life of prostitution, the only clear way to reduce violence is to reduce the size of the trade. New Zealand is cited as the gold standard by the sex industry, but it's a tiny, populated, isolated island in the Pacific Ocean. Canada shares the longest border in the world with the USA. Canada would become America's brothel. By full decriminalization of prostitution, and it's already partially decriminalized because the sellers are immune from prosecution, the demand for paid sex would increase. The numbers of sex buyers would increase. That's men and boys. So where does the supply come from? Youth, children, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. The Indigenous would be first casualties since they are already severely overrepresented in the sex industry. Prostitution could not exist if underage individuals were not recruited. Prostitution relies on human trafficking. The two cannot be delinked. Trafficking is for the purpose of prostitution, although not all prostituted persons are trafficked. The majority in prostitution have pimps. Organized crime and international crime syndicates are involved. Currently, the growing problem is in schools, where there is now peer-on-peer recruiting. School administrators, counselors, PACs, parents and students need education to stop exploitation. School liaison officers are really important. Here's a recent case I was interviewed by Global News in Manitoba regarding the recent case of R versus Alcorn. This was a particularly disturbing case because it involved an underage Indigenous girl who was sexually exploited, filmed, and later she committed suicide. The perpetrator was charged and he appealed for a lighter sentence. Instead, the justices quadrupled his sentence, setting a court precedent for the entire country. So what are education resources? Number one, I spoke this morning with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection out of Manitoba. They run cybertip.ca, and they've got this fantastic guide, and I'd really recommend it. And it's for parents and guardians, and it's called Picking Up the Pieces. I mean, this is where we've gotten to. The numbers of child sexual exploitation images are seriously increasing. So this is from last year. 37% increase in overall online victimization of children. 35% increase of non-consensual distribution of online intimate images, with an increase of 39% of our youth reporting. 97% increase in reports of online luring. 74% in reports of sextortion involving the platforms that our youth use every day. 90% of grooming, luring, buying, and selling of sex occurs online. Particularly disturbing are Discord, that's a gaming site, Google search, Kik, Meta, which is Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, OnlyFans, Reddit, and Twitter. Number two, former Member of Parliament Joyce Smith, who introduced 2 laws on human trafficking and PSEPA, has launched the very timely National Human Trafficking Education Center. And it is wonderful. I can send you a video on it. It's so well done, and you can access for free online training modules. Number 3, and down here at the bottom, I've mentioned in BC, we have the Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons. They have free online training, and the Children of the Street, they offer school programs, and they're great too. So my goal is we need enforcement of the law and education, particularly in BC. We are decades behind all provinces in Canada in addressing this crime. Here's my ask. I would like a support letter. Please write the Minister of Justice, David Lametti, and he knows me, that the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act needs to be strengthened and consistently enforced in Canada, along with a robust rollout educational campaign. I can send sample letters that I've received from other councils. And again, I just want to say thank you. Tofino, Ucluelet, it's my favorite place. It's my happy place on the planet. And you have so many visitors coming in. You really need to know about this issue. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Cathy, for your faithful dedication to this cause. And I for one, really appreciate you coming again. And I know you spend most days doing this, so I very much appreciate you bringing it to our awareness. I'd like to just open it up to council now on, does anyone have questions or comments or any thoughts about this supportive letter? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you, Councillor Thicke, and thank you, Cathy. Thank you for coming back again and the update. And my question is, I remember was it about a year ago that you presented to council? And I believe we wrote a letter last time. Did we not?
No.
Oh dear, I don't think so.
Okay, we didn't. Okay, that was my question. And then is this a new campaign that you're doing, or is it a follow-up?
It's because I've just finished presenting to the Federal Justice Committee, and they've stacked the deck with the pro-prostitution lobby.
Okay.
And I'm now alerting every city council in BC, if we lose that law, you will all feel it, especially in Tofino. I mean, you're a tourism destination.
Okay, thank you.
Would anyone else like to comment? Yes, Mayor Law, and then Councillor Steer.
I think Councillor Steer had his hand up first. Go ahead.
It was mostly just you, Cathy, thank you once again, and appreciate bringing it to our attention. The letter of support that you recommend, you said there you had example letters that you could forward to us. I suspect I have, there will be a consensus on council to provide that letter of support. And so if that could be forwarded to us, so we would have the appropriate example of what you think might be the most efficient letter to bring forward. So that would be my only ask right now. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Councillor Steer and Mayor Law.
Thank you so much, Cathy. You know what, since your last presentation last year, this has been on my mind quite a bit, and I actually have had somebody stay at my house for a week who this is his job, actually, working with to address sex trafficking. So we had a lot of great info, and I can confirm that this is a real problem, and I'd be very happy to recommend a letter of support. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? Questions? Yeah, I also would concur with the others that I think a letter of support would go a long way. And I know we need hundreds of those to change laws and make, change minds. So I would support what the others are suggesting, and just looking to our CAO. Do we need to pass a motion, or is what we've asked sufficient for this?
Through the chair, either way, I mean, the mayor can write a letter on behalf of the municipality. I think in a circumstance like this, having a little bit more push behind it being from all of council would be desirable. And remembering that we're in committee of the whole, so the committee, not to be too much of a bureaucrat, but the committee is recommending to council.
Thank you. Then would someone like to make a recommendation, a motion to council? Councillor Chalmers?
Yeah, I will move that Council of Whole recommends to a future council meeting for the mayor to write a letter based on the letters of support that are recommended for the topic. That was a really bad motion.
Yeah, maybe we could just make it a bit more
Snip it a bit. So I'll try to recommend to a council meeting that the mayor write a letter of support for not for sex. Can somebody help me here?
You'd like to make a motion for the mayor to write a letter of support on behalf of council to support the.
That's where I got stuck.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm missing do you want the word just in there, or would Cathy? I'm looking to you for the right words there. Sorry.
You're muted, Cathy.
Oh.
The best start, I think, is for me to forward what I've got so far, rather than me telling you how to put it together. I can just send you what I've got. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And I think that we are in agreement, if Ms. Bess could help us out here, just with the notion that the mayor and council would like to support what you have asked us to do today. So I think that is the gist of what we want to have happen, and that will come forward. That motion will come forward at a future council meeting. Am I to understand that correctly? Yeah. Okay. I've got Ms. Bess nodding approval. So yeah, is what we've said enough?
Thank you, Councillor Chair Thicke. Yes, I think I have what's sufficient here, and what will happen is we'll provide the committee of the whole minutes to a regular meeting of council, probably in a consent agenda, and we'll put that resolution out. So in a consent agenda that will be automatically approved for action. So I think we've got enough. And thank you, Cathy Peters, for your presentation. I think I have enough here. So.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Cathy, for coming and bringing this to our attention. We all appreciate it. Thank you. And without further ado, we're moving on to 6.2. And we have a delegation from James Rodgers, co-founder and executive director of the CARE Network, in regarding a regional fee for regarding support for a regional fee for animal kenneling service. And so I presume that Ms. Best, you will promote James to the speaker. And James, just a reminder that you have 10 minutes, and could you please, for the audience, introduce yourself and just a word of introduction. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. James Rodgers with the CARE Network here. Just gonna see if I can get this fired up. There we go. Can everyone see the slide of sort of black and white photo, cute puppy?
Yes, and Mr. Rodgers, your camera is off. I'm not sure if that's intended.
Oh, no, it's not. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. Yes, so good afternoon, Your Worship, councillors. Thanks again for taking the time to discuss CARE Network's latest proposal. This one's informed by you and your staff's feedback, questions, and directions over the last little while. And I just want to start for reference, as stated here, CARE Network is a nonprofit, and our goal is related to things like hosting spay-neuter clinics, building dog houses, educational projects related to animal care, dog bite prevention, that kind of stuff. And it's all funded through project grants and small donations, and of course with volunteer work. Just see how this works now. Well, not sure how to get this moving. Anybody have any idea what you're supposed to hit?
Hey, James, if you hit either your forward arrow or your space bar, I know the forward arrow on my computer on the PowerPoint will advance the slide.
Yeah, I'm doing both. Oh, there we go. Something clicked. So thanks for that. Appreciate it. In about 2016, it became apparent that the region was getting to the point of needing additional resources to support animal control efforts. This was back in the day when bylaw officers were taking dogs home for the night, keeping dogs at the office in the trucks. And it was at that point with our sort of region-wide perspective, CARE's region-wide perspective, it enabled us to see the sustainable solution was in the economies of scale and setting up a shelter facility to serve the region, rather than each community having to sort of fund the capital costs for setting up sheltering and the related operating expenses. And it was in 2017, as you can see here, that CARE first contacted the District of Tofino with a proposal for such services. It was a little different at that time. It goes back a number of years. But it's really since then that we've been in discussion with District of Tofino senior staff and the bylaw team to try and figure this all out. Throughout all that time, we have been approached by District of Tofino bylaw staff throughout, and including up to 2 weeks ago. For the most part, we've been able to help. We have always been reminding that this can't go on indefinitely. Without a contract in place, it really puts our organization, our board of directors, at great risk with regard to liability. And of course, there's all the costs that come along with providing a service such as this. Let's see if this works. There we go. We think the benefits are pretty clear related to regional animal kenneling. What might not be as clear is the liabilities of the status quo approach, which perhaps we can get into a little later. But as I said, the animal kenneling does come with a lot of hard costs. This is the fact, no matter where you are or whether those are internal or external expenses to your organization. And as you can see, here's a list of the operating costs that we pay for. And what's not shown here is, of course, the capital cost of establishing a kenneling facility, which again, the idea was that CARE would do that for the region, and all the communities could benefit from us covering the capital cost. The good news, there's revenue too. It's not just all money going out. The District of Tofino does have the ability to recover costs, and it's a critical part of the whole program. What we're seeing here is some of the fees and fines that are charged elsewhere in the region. In fact, most of the communities in the region are at these levels of fees and fines. We've also shown here that our numbers looking ahead, say 2 years, between the licensing fees that could be charged, and I do think it's time to start looking at cat licensing, something that we're sharing with all the communities, and some in the region have already taken on cat licensing. And then the impound and other related fees and fines for those who aren't complying with your bylaw. And remember, all these funds come straight to the District of Tofino as cost recovery for the expenses of kenneling services and whatnot. And so we figure within about 2 years, you could be seeing this kind of revenue. And that's something, certainly with licensing, that we'd like to support a campaign so that it is a winning campaign. And there is a bit of a science to it. So it's not that one has to reinvent any wheels. But again, a big part of it is getting the numbers up to where they need to be, as shown here, and the current bylaw. These numbers, by the way, are similar to the numbers that we proposed for the District of Tofino Animal Care and Control bylaw a few years ago. And this would get you up to about the same level as the rest of the region right now. So the other point I wanted to make was just about the discrepancy in statistics, the sort of 8 versus 168 question. Why do people call CARE more? I think it's pretty simple. I think it's, this is all we do. We help animals, that's it, and that's all. And we have a pretty good social media presence. So I think it's pretty quick for people to be, giving us a shout when there's an animal situation. The bylaw staff do help animals, but they also have many other priorities and issues that they're dealing with. And I'm sure it's just to some extent a staffing issue. The other part maybe is that we do respond quickly. Shout out to the District of Tofino's grant, council grant, to help us train more animal emergency responders. Those volunteers do a great job of getting people on site right away until we can follow up and if need be, get staff there for a situation if that's what's required. So ultimately today our proposal is asking for your help. We do want to establish an animal kenneling service managed by the ACRD. So again, that regional service that we talked about, I think last time, and that with the idea of it being paid through ACRD taxation. From my conversations with ACRD staff, we're looking at about a 2 to 3 year timeline for that to come together. I would hope we could get that down to 1 to 2 years, but I don't know. But one of the first steps to getting there is a letter of support from each of the communities in the region to take to the West Coast Committee so that they could then take that to the ACRD board, and that would really get the sort of machine rolling and all the steps that come as a result. And then the other piece of that, of course, is the interim funding needed for this service to keep it going for that 1 to 3 years until it can be moved under the ACRD's management and through their taxation program. So there is a lot of added value in this Kenneling service. One of the big ones for me is the human-wildlife conflict mitigation. We've just helped with 2 situations in Tofino in the last week, I think. You know, getting folks on site to keep everybody safe is critical. Another value added is, of course, stray cat management, which helps with disease spread. And then there's just the access to our animal handling expertise with dangerous dogs, our after-hours support, and then help with licensing campaigns, animal licensing campaigns, if that's of interest to your team. In summary, I hope what I've been able to address here is that number one, what we're talking about here is funding for a service. This is animal kenneling is a service that's provided by for-profits and nonprofits. So again, just want to make it clear that this is a service we're talking about. Also, number two, that animal kenneling is an integral component of animal control services. And for it to be effective, it does need to be provided within reasonable proximity, and which I would suggest is here on the coast, not in Port Alberni. Number three, the good news, it comes with revenue. Like I said, I think we've got $20,000 within a couple of years that could be access to help pay for this kind of stuff. Number four, the need for this service, I think, has been established. We've got a lot of stats. We've also asked community members to share their support for the service through a petition. We're up to, I think, probably over 110 signatures, Tofino residents specifically, and be happy to provide that to staff to verify all the signatures if that's the proper process. I wasn't sure at what point to present that or hand that over,
Excuse me, Mr. Rodgers, we're just hitting the 10-minute mark closely, so.
Great, I have one sentence, which is thanks again for your consideration, time, and support.
Great. Thank you very much, James, for your presentation and just outlining what you would like us to consider. As this is a committee of the whole, it's not necessarily a place where we are making any final decisions, but we are having a discussion if needed or questions for you so that we can better understand the questions that you have for us. So I'd like to open it up to council now, just to, are there any questions for James at this time? Councillor Chalmers, thank you.
Hi, James. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, what sort of calls would you get? I know from my experience in having helped out with taking care of dogs every now and then. I know when dogs need a new home or something like that, but as far as what other types of calls would you get that animals would be kennelled?
So that we deal with the last slide, which was just sort of an add-on, just was a quick summary of statistics from 2022 to date. And so 42% of the animals we've worked with just this year with Tofino, 42% were related to lost or stray dogs and cats.
Okay.
21% were related to dangerous animal situations. 32, so like dogs typically, 32% related to wild animals, and 50% of those were potential human-wildlife conflict situations. So the calls were about wild animals, but they were in relation, 50% of them, to domestic animals being at risk or humans being at risk as a result. Mm-hmm. And then, as you said, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, just that 26% relate to injured animals in the district.
So my follow-up question is, we've been talking at council about the struggles that bylaw has with off-leash dogs, and how do we address that? People getting injured by dogs running into them, the shorebirds. Is that something that you guys deal with or have dealt with, or
yeah, and it's definitely something that was on the table to help if, again, your team was interested. We do think we can help with proactive patrols of beaches, both for the dog poo situation, the on-leash. I mean, just the other day, a dog was pretty severely and expensively hurt from an off-leash dog attack in Tofino. And again, as much as possible, bylaw enforcement is about, compliance, voluntary compliance, right? And so I think that kind of stuff, we don't want to take over the bylaws role, but we think we can certainly support it and help bring some of these numbers down.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chalmers. Councillor McMaster, please go ahead.
Hi, James. Do you have any breakdown as to how many dogs, for instance, are owned by residents and how many dogs are owned by non-residents or visitors, no fixed abode?
Yes, I do have some numbers. I don't know if I have them right at my fingertips. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, so we have some general statistics based on the Canadian averages for dogs and cats. One of my previous presentations would have had all that in one of the slides, and sorry, I don't have that in front of me. But we've also we've got the numbers from the visitors using some statistics that the park has collected specific to visitors with dogs. And so we've broken all those numbers down to give a good sense of what each community, specifically Tofino and Ucluelet, are dealing with related to resident versus visitor dogs. And part of what we did was we broke that number for visitors down to a per capita number so that we could work with it and figure out some of the averages of the costs per resident or visitor. But that's certainly something I could send over again. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing that. If you
Sure.
want to email it out to everybody.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
bet.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from other council members? Councillor Steer, please go ahead. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I know. It's anyways. I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you, James, for the presentation once again. I really do appreciate you looking at the. We had discussed about maybe looking at it from a regional model and approaching the ACRD, and so I do appreciate your follow up on that, because I do think as the as a regional government that does provide those kind of as you pointed out, that this is a regional issue, and so I really appreciate that. And in your presentation, you had mentioned that part of that process would be a letter of support in terms of the initiative that you're looking for. And I think I wouldn't mind suggesting to council that we do write, and I might be able to help craft what that letter of support might look like with your input in terms of writing to the ACRD and specifically to the West Coast Committee, what a letter of support might look like in terms of providing that regional service so that all of the communities in our area would be able to support in the appropriate way if it was deemed a service that the region, and I think you made a case for that and to move forward. So if that was possible, that would be great. And I don't know if we specifically would need to do that now, and I'm looking, I don't see Nikki up on screen, but it might be something it might maybe offline to discuss with you what you're looking for in that letter of support to bring to the ACRD.
Wonderful. And yeah, I'd probably look to you for some of the guidance on that too. So I think maybe between the two of us, we could figure something out if, again, that's the proper process according to staff. Yeah.
Sure. I'm more than willing to do that.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Steer, and that was one of the asks of the delegation. So are you then saying that you would like to work on that and bring it back to council at a future meeting?
Yeah, we could certainly do that. I'm looking to James. I mean, I just want to make sure that what you would want, and I can help you with in terms of approaching the ACRD West Coast Committee, talking about providing it would be a new service that they would be looking at. So that is, as you pointed out, it is a fairly big deal. And so how the District of Tofino, our end of things, might be able to support through a letter of support to the ACRD what the content might look like in the most appropriate way.
And yeah, I'd be happy to help, or put something together for your review, perhaps. And most of the other communities in the region are already paying for the service. So that's where the memorandum of understanding piece comes in, just to sort of, again, that consolidated support. But starting with that letter of support from the District of Tofino would be a huge step.
Yeah, because sorry, through the chair, just as a follow-up, because there are considerations when you start looking at the contributions from those members that are outside of the ACRD, such as Tla-o-qui-aht. There are treaty nations within our territory that are within this regional district that would be contributing to that. The other part is also in terms of the revenues that might be generated through the licensing process that you suggested, and how that would be dispersed, whether it would go in through to the ACRD. I have no idea, but there are a lot of issues that come up with creating a new service, and I'm looking to our CAO as well, and in terms of the complications that can come with providing those types of regional services. So I look forward to the conversation, James.
I do too. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Lott, did you have a comment or a question?
I had a couple questions actually for James. Thanks for the presentation, James. I had a couple questions about your stats here. 168 animals for 2021. What's the breakdown, dogs, cats, and wild animals for those calls? And what's the breakdown, dogs from Tofino residents and dogs from visitors?
Those are actually, that 168 is actually from 2020. So we're just putting together the 2021 numbers. And basically what we're having to do in order to get that information is go through each file. So our software does a great job of tracking everything, but pulling out those kinds of metrics isn't as straightforward as that in terms of visitor versus local, I guess, or resident.
Just dogs, cats, and wild animals then?
Yeah, I don't have that right in front of me, but I can certainly provide that because we do certainly track that. And we do have the data for visitors versus residents, but again, just have to sort of pull it all together for 2021 and can send that over.
Yeah, sure. I think that is what staff had been asking for. But I got another question for you, the liability issue. So right now, council has made a motion to staff to set aside up to $10,000 for Kenneling services. But you've mentioned a couple times that there is some liability for your organization and that you must have a contract. Can you explain that, how that works?
Yeah. Unfortunately, animal situations are often very emotional situations, and dealing with the guardians can be quite challenging. And so the idea of us taking, and the other piece, I guess, to factor in is that animals are considered property under law still. And so taking on somebody's animal into our care, and again, by some measure, taking their property into our care, it puts us at a very in a precarious situation when it comes to our insurance and the safety related pieces. This came up recently with a Good Samaritan in town who took in a stray dog running in traffic. Bilo, I believe, was helping coach them through Facebook to find the guardian, hold the dog until the guardian could be found. They found the guardian. Sounds like a happy ending, except the guardian showed up irate. And the result was a video of the dog being dragged across a parking lot here in Tofino. And that could have easily gone south for the person, the Good Samaritan as well. I can tell you bylaw training is mostly about how to stand in front of somebody and not get punched in the face. They spend a lot of time in bylaw training to go over that. So again, being in a situation where we're caring for an animal that is not our property, we're not the SPCA. The SPCA is covered under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And they're the only organization there, except for perhaps the RCMP, I think would fall under that, and maybe some other police forces. But for us as an independent organization, we just need to make sure that we're covered and have a contract that basically shows a chain of custody. And we do this with the RCMP when they call us after hours to help with situations.
So you have a contract with the RCMP?
No, we're in discussions with them, also with Parks Canada. It's all the same thing for us. We've been saying we can't keep taking on animals because it's putting us in a bad situation, again, with liability, not to mention all the expenses that come along with it. So these are ongoing conversations in order to get all this buttoned up so we can continue to provide these services.
Okay, I'm really just trying to figure out, like, so contracting through your request to contract the service through the district will allow you to then have insurance for liability, whereas if you just have a kenneling service for the bylaw to access, you won't be able to get insurance. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure what your second example there was. Say that part again. The kenneling. What was your second example?
So right now, if things go through, then bylaw can seize a dog, for instance, bring it to the care network to kennel for a fee, but then you will not be covered insurance-wise for that service. Is that right?
Well, in that case, I'd be more concerned about lawsuits. And we have certainly had our share of legal challenges, again, with people not being happy with a situation where, again, their property is involved and quite frankly, a loved one of their family members. So there's a few different angles there. Certainly insurance gets a little dicey, and that can relate to the legal situations in terms of having the proper insurances in place to cover legal costs and whether one's at fault and if there's a proper chain of custody. And so again, without a contract, we just feel like, yeah, it's a precarious situation for our organization and for our board of directors.
Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Councillor McMaster, you had a question?
Along similar lines, recognizing the SPCA isn't out here on the West Coast, is there any possibility you guys could be affiliated with the SPCA and then fall under their insurance umbrella? I know that's long-term thinking, but is that a possibility?
That actually goes back to when we started, and we actually started as volunteers under the SPCA with the idea, that exact idea. It did not work out. They had a number of reasons, and but basically at that point when we were in discussions, they ceased to provide service out here on the coast, and a lot of that was the logistics and costs involved with transporting animals and staff back and forth. So that is definitely something, and this wasn't something we wanted to get into in the first place, but it was a need that we felt we could serve, and with the SPCA not providing any service out here, that is how we came to be as an independent nonprofit who still works closely with the SPCA and other groups across the island, but not under their umbrella. And of course, the costs would still be the same as they are today. Having a facility out here just costs money. There's just no two ways about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions for you, James. Thank you for your presentation. And one of the questions is just in regards to the wording that you have used, which is animal kenneling. Could you expand for me, please? You know, there's a lot of definitions of animals, and I know this sounds like a small point, but I've read quite a number of animal control bylaws in the last few days, and I'm just wondering, what do you include in your definition of animals? Is it domestic as well as wild, or do you have a different definition?
We do have the capacity to hold, so far, all the animals that we've been tasked with holding. So we work closely with the Conservation Office Service, with wildlife rescue organizations that specialize in, say, eagles and other raptors. And bats. Recently there was a bat in Tofino that we helped with, possibly with rabies. Yeah, we'll help all animals, and we can hold on to all animals. Now with our facility, we do keep everybody safe and separate. So, you know, we have a very separate space for cats, another one for dogs, lots of room for dogs, and then, you know, more rooms for other kinds of animals.
Yeah, I guess that's a question that I was sort of struggling with, because I understand that, you know, different levels of government have different authorities over wild versus domestic animals. And I'm just wondering why in Tofino or the West Coast do we, you know, we're blurring those lines. So the costs go up and the costs for kenneling go up and the transportation goes up. So to my mind, I'm thinking, you know, about something I heard about today, which is the, so I just want to get the right name, the Wildlife Attractant Management Bylaws coming to council on April 26th.
Right.
And I have a feeling that this, and I'm hoping that the Manager of Protective Services might be able to nod that this is indeed coming. But I'm wondering, you know, that this might not give us some clearer delineation of whose roles and responsibilities. For example, wild animals might fall under versus the district and its current, I guess, auspices or oversight of domestic animals. Do you have a comment on that for me?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So really the kenneling in relation to the District of Tofino would be whatever animals the District of Tofino wants kenneled. And so that would be defined by your bylaw or bylaws, I suppose. We do, as I said, have capacity for any animal, and we work with different organizations, you know, based on whose jurisdiction, you know, again, the COs have to call us when they want us to go deal with a bear or a deer, eagles are another case, you know, situation, DFO, of course, for the sea mammals, marine animals. So when it comes to when it comes to the wild animals in Tofino, it's maybe less of a situation about the kenneling of that or housing of that animal, that wild animal, but more about mitigating the human wildlife conflict situation. For instance, an eagle on a path, an injured eagle on a path where there's a lot of people walking dogs, it's an eagle situation, but it's putting the dog and perhaps the dog guardian at risk. So in that sense, it's more about attending to mitigate the situation and again, about protecting the folks involved, and not about kenneling necessarily that eagle. Right. So even though it's it's sort of triggered by a wildlife situation or the province's animal, it actually relates to the District of Tofino's maybe resident and a dog. And often what, you know, we see is, you know, if a dog gets into a scuffle, lots of times the guardian will go in to get the dog, could get injured themselves. And again, just opens up for more risk and liability, I think. So, sorry.
Yeah, and the reason I'm getting is, you know, the lines get blurred and then the scope gets bigger and our responsibilities get bigger and the money that is needed to service that, gets bigger. So as a counselor who is responsible for those things, I just, there isn't really a revenue source. For example, you mentioned the licensing fees and the possible amounts, and, talking to people in our jurisdiction, it seems very difficult to get people to license their domestic animals. So I'm just thinking from a council point of view that, it's going to be very difficult to raise the revenue as you suggest. And now if our scope is that much broader, it's going to be, again, more difficult to pay for those services. So that's just a concern that I have. The other thing is, I just wondered, I read with Whistler that they actually have presented to the pet-friendly hotels. And I understand that the pet-friendly hotels give a portion of the revenue that they receive for those nights accommodation back to the WAG network. And I just wondered if you had ever considered that source of potential revenue. In other words, when hotels or motels or Airbnbs are hosting animals, which adds to the numbers and the possible rate of conflict, have you considered approaching them for some sort of subsidy in this regard?
Yes, we have. And we have made a presentation. I can't remember the name of the committee. Maybe it's through the Chamber of Commerce. No, I think it's a separate organization, sorry. But we have made a presentation to that effect. And that's certainly something that we could try to move forward on and redirect those kinds of funds to this kind of program so that the Tofino accommodation providers are supporting this. Yeah, love to talk more about that. I think that kind of creative thinking is what we need. Just the point about, so in the Eagle dog situation, of course, the payment there in a sense would be coming from the licensing of that dog potentially, or if it was a visitor dog from, as you said, the pet fee would be a nice tie-in. And I do think that we can get the licensing numbers up in Tofino. Number one, the first thing is to get the fees up. The bylaw updates, an updated bylaw would allow for new fee structure, which would be more in keeping with the rest of the region. And I think with greater awareness of the animal services that you're providing in the community and the right marketing of that or outreach, we could certainly get the numbers up. And like I said, there's a lot of ways to do it differently than it's been done for the last, and I don't mean just in Tofino, but generally you think about everything else that's going on and the different platforms that are available. There's a lot more that can be done now, I think, to increase those revenues like never before.
It seems like an uphill battle here in Tofino is what I'm hearing from our manager anyways. So yeah, I guess that was just, I think maybe the rest of the conversation belongs to the council, but I just wanted to ask if there was any further questions for James before we say thank you. Mayor Law, thank you.
Just a clarification, James, that data, you're going to send me or us the data on the 168, the breakdown of dogs, cats, wild animals, and hopefully some breakdown on where those dogs came from.
Yeah, we'll work on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Councillor Chalmers, question?
Sure, actually just follow up on Mayor Law's question, because I think you said the data that you had was from 2020. Do you by any chance have anything from 2019, just knowing that 2020 was a bit of an abnormal year for the world?
Just a bit abnormal, yeah. 2019, we were on a different system. So I would have to see what we've got. It was basically a big shift was in 2020 in terms of we're now working with software that's very specific to what we do. And it has two parts, one managing the shelter operation and then the other being tracking all these kinds of things. So that did start, I think, March 2020, which is why we've got really good numbers from then on. But I'll see if our old data, yeah, it was, we were doing enough to keep an eye on things, but it wasn't as robust as what we have now.
I understand. Maybe 2021 will give a bit more realistic numbers as far as tourists versus resident.
Well, and the software, they've actually made improvements. We've been giving them feedback, so they've actually added more metrics. So even in the last year or even 6 months, they've put more pieces in for us to get better metrics out of it. So we're getting there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chalmers. I see, Councillor Anderson, you've joined us. And did you have any questions for Mr. Rodgers in relation to the presentation that was just given with regard to animal kenneling service?
No, not right now. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no further questions, we'd like to say thank you, James, for coming. And we certainly have a lot to think about, and we have a lot to think about in terms of our own animal bylaws being updated as well. So yeah, thank you for coming. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time. Bye-bye, everyone.
I just wanted to add one more thing that it seemed when I read our own animal control bylaw, it was dating back to 2001. So I'm just looking at our Brent Baker there and just seeing whether there's any opportunity for comment on that, on updating that bylaw.
Yeah, I definitely feel there's always opportunity for updating. It's just about trying to figure out where in the priority sequence it's going to fit. I did take your suggestion today after speaking with you earlier about you finding some positive things in the Whistler animal control bylaw. I did have a quick look through that as well too, and I found that ours is not dissimilar to the Whistler one, that it covers off much of the same material, although some of the wording is different the way it's done. Well, yeah, I do see that there is opportunity to update that. I think updating the fee schedules is something that all staff are on the lookout for in all areas, and that was something that's been asked of us over the last little bit. With the animal attractant management bylaw that will be coming forward, there's a few different pieces in that as well that will support the animal control bylaw also. So there's a few things happening at the same time.
Yeah, thank you for your input. And I'm just looking to Mayor Law. I don't think is there any further discussion needed after what we've just heard and talked about, or is anyone needing to make a motion to bring to council?
I have no motions to bring to council. I'm interested to see some data and look into it more. I'd be interested to have Chief Baker look into that. But it's busy times, and I think we're going to need some significant. There's going to need some work to deal with some of the upcoming issues with off-leash dogs and some of the issues. So I think there's going to be. There's going to be lots to discuss and lots to work toward.
Agreed. Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you. I agree with what Mayor Law just said, in that we have been having conversations about off-leash dogs and what that looks like, and I just want to make sure that the conversation doesn't just fall away from us not making any sort of motion. And I don't know if it's appropriate sort of to tie this conversation today into that other conversation, but I just want to sort of do we have, so I guess the question for you, Brent Baker, is that something that we're looking at as far as off leash? Is this anything that is on your plate? Knowing that you have a very full plate, is it something that we should maybe set as a council as a priority if it is something that we feel? That was a lot of if questions, sorry.
I'm not sure the easiest way to answer all the ifs there.
I could simplify it if you want.
The off-leash dogs is absolutely a priority. The challenging piece to that is just resourcing that priority. Another one isn't a very positive thing in people's minds is managing fireworks. And in order to manage an off-leash dog, you have to be there to see every off-leash dog. We get calls about people saying there's an off-leash dog here or there. But if it takes us 5 minutes to get there, the dog is generally no longer there. So unless we have the resources to be everywhere all the times, there are challenges that are going to be there. So being fully resourced to support those needs, that's probably our best chance at making the positive step. We can increase the severity of the fee and penalties and those sorts of things, but the reality is that you have to be there to be able to do that, and that does take the resources. So
if council's interested, there may be an opportunity, after following through with the ACRD, that this may be an opportunity to help resource that if it's a direction that we want to go. I guess I'm looking to the rest of the council. Is this a direction that we want to explore further in resourcing staff to come back with more information, or do?
I see Mayor Law had his hand up.
Oh, just clarification. Were you sorry, Councillor Chalmers, were you resourcing bylaw to deal with some of the up and coming off leash issues, or resourcing care to take? Sorry.
Well, I think the conversations are potentially intertwined, and if council's interested, I think there is an opportunity to ask staff. And I am very aware of asking staff is another thing on the plate. But if we're already talking about off-leash issues, we're already talking about bylaw issues and the issues that Care Network's dealing with right now that we're not paying for, is there room for that to all support each other? If bylaws, just like fireworks, is not able to be there, but the Care Network is, then maybe it is worth a conversation about an opportunity for us to be supporting the request from the Care Network and our own agenda in supporting the town in their issues. I think that's the conversation I was looking at. I just didn't want it to kind of fall off the table right now. I'm asking the rest of council if there's any interest, I guess.
Go to Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, Councillor Anderson, please.
Well, I don't know if this will be much help. I'm sorry for jumping in late. We just sort of had a service review, and the whole issue, I guess, of bylaw in general and how we resource it is kind of like quite a big conversation, and it's about all areas of bylaw, not just sort of pointing them in one direction and then another. So that's kind of like an overarching conversation I think the council wants to have. Maybe that's of course related to our budget conversations and where they are, how they fit into the strategic plan. And we just had a service review too that were telling us areas of the district to focus on. So to me, it's sort of a really big conversation, unless we just want to give immediate direction on dogs. It's going to be a bit of a complex conversation involving budget and the new hirings that we're doing, etc. So with the new CAO on our plate and all that as well. So I just don't know the place for that. If that's right now, if that's sort of just maybe council having a refocus on our strategic plan, just to touch base with that again before we sort of make any big decisions about resourcing departments, and before we look at what are our priorities in that department, considering all the things it does. So I don't know if that helps, but those are my thoughts on it. And if there's a specific thing that any councillor has to do, around the pet control bylaw or something like that, I think we should, you know, maybe look at other bylaws, come up with what you want to have, put in a notice of motion, maybe work with a couple other councillors on it to get an idea, not sort of just sort of have some ideas, I think, before we try to figure it out. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, and thank you for your big picture thinking. I think that's very helpful. Councillor McMaster, you had your hand up.
Yeah, very similar to Councillor Anderson. I don't think we should put the cart before the horse. I think we need to discuss things like off-leash dogs and look at the problem and possible solutions, which may or may not involve care. But I don't think we should confuse the two issues at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. And we've got a lot of things coming up that will help us, I think, focus. I'm just thinking about the potential meeting on April 26th and the wildlife attractant bylaw, and our conversation here today, in which we've noted that our current animal control bylaw needs updating. So it's not to say no, but we have some things to do, I think, to keep our own house in order that we need to consider, as Councillor Anderson pointed out. Is there any comment from our CAO in this regard?
I don't have anything substantive to add. I think the council is all around the recognition that maybe there is a need to have a look at our animal control function and regulation. But I also appreciate hearing from council that you understand that doing more will require more resources. So I think it's a much bigger discussion than we probably have time and space for here this evening.
Good. I really appreciate everyone's input, and I'm sure that our manager of protective services has heard us loud and clear about the comments, the questions, and Councillor Chalmers, do you feel comfortable leaving it at this with what has been discussed and the questions that have gone forward to our staff, and knowing that the budget process is imminent? Do you feel comfortable with where we are right now?
Yeah, I think so. I think yes. I just didn't want it to get dropped just from this council, the whole meeting with no direction at all. But I think the conversation, I appreciate what Councillor Anderson said, and I think it does still give direction forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we have quite a few things upcoming from what I've heard in the near meetings in April. So I don't think in any way that this is going to be dropped. So thank you for everyone's comments, and I think we can begin to move along. We have correspondence, and section 8.1, the new 2022 business license regulation bylaw highlights that there is a verbal report from Protective Services. So please go ahead. Thank you. Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I do have a slideshow, and I'll just share my screen here. Okay, we should be seeing business license regulation bylaw 1239. And I did also want to mention that we do have Damon Johnson, our business license inspector, with us tonight, so that should there be any questions a bit more specific to what I'm able to answer, Damon's here. He's also got a lot of personal experience with some of the rationale for why we're incorporating things that we are and some of the changes that we've made. So again, we are in the draft stages of the business license regulation bylaw. There's a few pieces left to do, updating the fee schedule. It has been through legal review, but we do have opportunity to make changes with input from council tonight, should we need to. So tonight, we are going to have a bit of an overview, why there are new proposed regulations, where those regulations came from, and what's new and different. And we'll proceed through the bylaw, the new bylaw, with a bit of a review and cover off some of the key provisions that may require some council consideration. And Damon and I will do our best to try and take any notes on the feedback so that we can make those changes so that when it does come back in April for first readings, that we can incorporate those pieces as well too. So why there are new proposed regulations? So much of the increased regulations pertaining to the general provisions as well as the specific business classifications. So our goal is to clarify regulations in accordance with council's objectives. And where these regulations are coming from, much of it is direct input from council in accordance with your objectives, as well as a review of similar municipalities and their bylaws. That is definitely a piece that we always do, just similar to how we were speaking about the animal control bylaw. We look to our neighbors and people in a similar scenario to see what they're doing and how successful it's been for them, so that we can sort of, we're not recreating the wheel. We take recommendations from the district legal counsel in order to clarify the existing bylaw regulations as well. So getting into what's new, we do have some new provisions and regulations for all business operations. We're going to introduction of new business classifications, and we're going to increase enforcement powers for specific classifications. So some of those specifics, we're going to offer clarification on the license inspector's authorities under the community charter, clarification on public markets, and an introduction and clarification on more specific regulations pertaining to bed and breakfast, short-term rentals, and guest houses. And then following that will be an introduction to property managers as well. So if we start to go through the new bylaw, I'm only going to highlight the sections that are going to be a little bit different, and I'm not going to go through all the details, but sort of the bigger highlights just to get a feel for the direction that we're going. But if you do have questions, please ask, and I can try and give a few more of the specifics for each of those sections. So starting in section 2, which is our definitions, we want to ensure consistency with the district zoning bylaw and other district bylaws, as well as general revisions for overall clarification. New definitions with the 1239 bylaw include catering business, catered events, marketing, which is advertising, nonprofit, pawnbroker, residential events, tourist accommodation property, residential tourist accommodations, and respectful neighborliness brochure. In section 3, our general regulations. Most provisions will remain the same with the previous bylaw, but there are some new specific ones, starting with section 3.9, public property use. So any business that is being conducted using public property will be required to obtain a permit. So one of the things under consideration right now is the permit process handled by the business license inspector, or would council like to see each one of these opportunities presented at council for a resolution? Our objective is not to overwhelm council with all kinds of extra work. And so we do feel that this is most likely easily handled at the business licensing level, but open to feedback on that either now or towards the end of this presentation. Section 4 under administration, investigation, and enforcement. 4.1b, the power to suspend, cancel, or refuse a business license. Council may delegate this authority under the Community Charter, Part 3, Division 9, Section 60.4. This would minimize the council and district staff time from the current process of preparing hearings for consideration. So the way the bylaw is written now, if we wanted to suspend or cancel an individual's business license, from the time that we conduct our investigation that determines we feel that there's the need to do so, we then have to prepare a presentation for council, try and line that up with an upcoming council meeting, make the presentation for council to consider. This part of the business license bylaw would give that authority to the license inspector to make that decision. suspend or refuse the business license, and then council would still be in the position to hear the appeal hearing, which we currently have that process as well. 4.1E, removal of application documents as schedules. So currently we have 3 items that are attached to the business license bylaw. We have a business license application form, we have a business information sheet, and we have a fleet specification form for charter businesses. Those being attached as schedules to the bylaw means that any changes that we need to make within those forms requires an amendment to the bylaw. So removing those as schedules means that we can change and adapt them as needed. We can modify the forms to gather specific or different data as time goes on without taking the time to go back to council just to amend the bylaw to make those changes. They could be different annually if that was something that we felt would capture more information for our demographics. Application and renewal of business licenses. So 5.3, this puts a 30-day limit for application documents. So something that our business license inspector runs into all of the time is an application is submitted. It comes to the business license inspector and perhaps it's missing one of the forms. Let's say the business information sheet, which identifies staff housing, number of parking spaces, those types of things. The inspector is not able to complete the review process and provide the license to that business until they have that information. So upon realizing that it's not complete, they respond to the applicant and ask for those forms to be submitted. Some applicants may take 3, 4, or 5 months prior to getting that information back. In the meantime, they're technically operating without a license. It drags the process on and on. So by having it part of the bylaw that complete applications and information must be submitted within 30 days of the application, that puts that onus back onto the business license applicant to do the work in a timely manner, which helps frees up the business license inspector and prevents further backlog, reduces staff resources in chasing applicants for documentation. 5.7a, business licenses expire on December 31st. So this is written into our current business license regulation. It is understood that as of the 31st, your business license has expired, and if you continue to operate after that, you're operating without a license if you have not renewed it. We would like to put that wording right into the new bylaw that continuing to operate after December 31st without having submitted an application for renewal, you will be operating without a license, to again try and encourage people to get in with expediency and continue the process so that we can move on. 5.8, false declaration on an application. This allows the license inspector to immediately refuse a license if false information is provided on a new or renewal application. But again, giving the applicant the opportunity to submit again with a fee. The best example I can give on this one is people applying for a short-term vacation rental license, stating that they have an on-site caretaker, which we know not to be true. This gives us the opportunity to deny that right away based on false declaration, and have the applicant come back and try again when they take the necessary steps to meet the requirements of that license. Suspension, cancellation, and refusal of business license. Similar to what we had in section 4.1b, this does give the license inspector the authority to suspend, cancel, or refuse, and it specifies conditions of a business license to be met, such as the compliance with other district bylaws, enactments, and conditions. 6.3, this one here could have been helpful a number of times in the past. This would provide the authority for the business license inspector to post a notice on the property of the business indicating that the business license has been suspended. 6.4 provides the opportunity for a fee or a penalty if said notice has been removed. 6.5 posts a notice for operating without a business license. So again, for those short-term rentals that we're still working on trying to bring into compliance but continue to operate, being able to post a notice. And then again, 6.6, a fine for removing that notice without permission or without compliance to the business license. So the best example I could give of this that council may be familiar with is if there's been a violation of a liquor license at a restaurant, for instance. If there's been a violation, they will often be told, and a letter will be sent to the bylaw department saying, this business has been found in violation of such and such, and they are required to post this notice in a conspicuous location at the business for up to a certain number of days. And it just lets people know clearly that there has been a suspension and public awareness. So in section 7, it gets into specific regulations. So starting with 7.1 in public markets would be required to obtain a parks use permit. Those costs of those permits are still to be determined. Currently for the public market, in order for them to operate, there's just simply a damage deposit. But we're looking now, we have more and more businesses applying every year and wanting to make use of beaches, parks, trails as a part of their business. And so we're looking at having a permit process across the board that would be the same for everybody. Again, the cost that for that has not been determined yet, but that would apply to public markets as well. 7.13 would be the requirement of all market vendor operators to obtain a business license. There would be an annual fee, which has not yet been determined, and it would only be applied to those with a seasonal reserved space. So using the example of the public markets that we have right now, there are majority of those spaces that are pre-booked prior to the start of the year. They know where their space is going to be every weekend for the duration of the market. Those would be the individuals that would be applying for a business license, just like any other business. And one of the biggest reasons for this is to bring those businesses into the radar for fire inspections and other data gathering as well. We want to make sure that the same safety inspections are happening for those at-home businesses, just the way it would be for others as well. 7.3 is where we get into the residential tourist accommodation business. 7.3 does contain more general regulations for residential tourism accommodations and provisions that are in accordance with the zoning bylaw regulations regarding the number of rooms, etc. 7.31G will require residential tourist accommodation businesses to provide a PDF copy of the most recent respectful neighborliness brochure to each guest at the time of reservation confirmation, and provide and maintain a copy of the most recent respectful neighborliness brochure in a conspicuous location upon guest check-in. So this brochure, this was an idea that was introduced a number of years ago, and it contains information of some of our most common issues that we hear about from residents and visitors regarding beach fires, dogs on leashes, fireworks, noise, parking, those types of things that we want that information to be in the visitors' minds prior to arrival, and then again there upon arrival, so that they're aware of those things as they're coming and going within our community. 7.32, again, only operating within one dwelling unit, which is consistent with the more recent changes to Part 4 of the zoning amendments. And 7.33, more strict requirements during the application process. For instance, floor plan highlighting each bedroom's location. When we receive applications previously where short-term rental could take place in a 5-bedroom house, we found over the years that oftentimes the bedrooms that are being used are changing dramatically over the course of the year, depending on whether the homeowner is going away on vacation and then chooses to rent out the bigger portion of the house, and then they return and they rent out the smaller portion of the house. changes the revenue, changes the floor plan, leads to inaccuracies in the license application and the payments that have been made. So trying to get more focus on this is something that's been identified in the last couple of years. And then following up on that one, 7.34, license inspector shall calculate the number of guests that can be accommodated under the license as follows. Beds with a single or twin mattress can accommodate 1 guest. All other beds and sofa beds can accommodate 2. The license inspector shall not license any residential tourist accommodation business where the sleeping capacity of the premises exceeds the permitted number of guests. And so again, this is strictly to deal with people putting 1 or 2 or 3 queen size beds in every single room, and that would allow for a potential capacity of 12, but saying, no, we only limit it to 6 guests when we know that those types of things occur all the time. Number of beds will, and the capacity of those beds will limit the number of people that will come and stay in those units. 7.36a, must not rent out any sleeping units or provide any sleeping accommodation within any vehicle, tent, or accessory building other than that which is permissible under the zoning bylaw. And again, this is due to folks that are wanting to have both sides of it, rent out every space in their driveway, as well as have the vacation rental guests as well. We would prefer that they have long-term renters in their unit and follow the regulations. 7.37d, provide a minimum of 1 on-site parking space for use by the permanent resident. So in the business license calculations right now for a residential tourist accommodation, the license inspector calculates based on the table that he has how many parking spaces are required for that unit. It takes into consideration the on-site caretaker as well as the potential for guests. The experience that we have found, and this has been highlighted with the pay parking along Chesterman Beach, is that not all residential tourist accommodation business owners are willing to let their on-site caretakers use those parking spaces. So having this in the bylaw requires them to do so, and that is another thing that can be filed as a complaint. If the on-site caretakers are finding that that's not happening, then we have the ability to follow up and say you absolutely must allow your caretaker to make use of that parking space. Property management businesses are a new one for Tofino. This is something that's been on the rise in the last couple of years, but not necessarily captured through our business license bylaw. So 7.61a, property management business must display a list of all of the properties for which the property management services are provided. Provide names and addresses for all rentals under 30 days. And 7.62 ensures that all properties represented by the property management company are lawful and has their own business license. That allows us to hold the property management companies responsible if they are advertising businesses that are not meeting the business license requirements as well. 7.8, marine, air, and land charters. We have, as part of our schedules, an existing form called fleet inspection or fleet specification, which outlines how many passengers they take, helps us calculate the number of seating, those sorts of things, or number of parking spaces. What we're looking to add onto this is that applicants will be required to acknowledge that by signing, they are indicating that vessels outlined in the form are being operated in compliance with all Transport Canada regulations. We are not a Transport Canada inspector, nor are we going to go down and oversee exactly what they're doing, but at the time of applying for their license, they will acknowledge that they are complying with those regulations of Transport Canada. And the last one for tonight is 7.9, nonprofit businesses. 7.91, an operator of a nonprofit shall obtain a separate business license for each location that the business operates. The fee for the nonprofit license is still to be determined. And again, the nonprofit and the market vendors, these are ones that I'm sure we'll have some comments and questions from council on these ones, but they are areas that our legal advisors have strongly encouraged us to incorporate them into the business licensing process. the fee, we can decide on what that may be, but having them counted and taken into consideration for fire and life safety inspections and data collection and accountability is very important. And so that's why we've included them in this time as well. And that was the last slide. So I will stop sharing and see if there are any comments. There we go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Baker. And there are a number of questions popping up, so I'll open it up to Council. Councillor McMaster, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Baker. That was really good. I think I like a lot of what I see and hear. My first question concerns liability, where at the start you mentioned bylaw would have the authority to suspend a business, and then that business would appeal to council. What would our liability be if you suspended a business license, and so I assume the business would stop, and they appeal to council, and who knows how long it would take before it came to council, and they actually won the appeal? Would we be liable for loss of business in that time period?
It's a good question that I would have to ask that very specifically of the legal team. It was something that they had supported, and they provided the community charter references for where that's applicable. It's very common, that's for sure. But yeah, as far as the liability, I couldn't speak specifically to that without checking, and I certainly will be prepared to do that prior to this coming back to council. The process is going to be very similar, that the business license inspector is going to be doing all of the research and likely getting a legal opinion, which can happen quite quickly prior to making that decision. So it's not something that would be entered into lightly, of just us thinking that this smells a little fishy, let's press the pause button and deny the license at this time. We want to make sure that we go step by step and are doing everything in accordance with the community charter and being very careful. We've had excellent legal advice for the whole time that I've been involved in this. So I definitely know that that would continue, but I can ask that specific question and just see what we get back.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea. I'd just like a bit more clarification on that.
And I think, sorry if I may, I think the importance of that one too is if we look back to when we were working with the previous short-term rental issues with Tofino vacation rentals and those sorts of things, which was public and everybody's aware of it. It took, it can be a month before we can get before council for the first hearing. And when you have members of the community very upset knowing that something is going on and on and on, by the time we gather the correct information to make sure we have what we'll call airtight case, a summer can pass by. So it's having that ability to act quite quickly certainly would help. But sorry.
Just another question on a different topic. You going on to the short-term rentals, B&Bs. You asked that bedrooms be identified. Having run a B&B, and this may be just going over the top, I think it would be useful not only to identify the bedrooms, but also to identify the number of beds in that bedroom. In the sense, if someone has, they might only be allowed to have 2 people in there, but if they have 2 beds, I'm sure the temptation is going to be too great that they're going to fill that bed.
Absolutely, and that is in there as part 7.3.4, where the license inspector will have that mapped out, what's in each room, so that we absolutely know that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And who was next? Was that you, Mayor Law? Please go ahead. And then Councillor Steer.
Thanks, Chief Baker. Actually, Councillor McMaster asked my first question, so that's fantastic. I did want to know how many hearings Like what's the, I've got a couple questions, but this is the first one. I mean, how many hearings go on? Like what's the average number of hearings that you would be required of council for cancellation of business license?
Just to clarify, are we asking how many hearings we have had previously?
Yeah,
or-
that's right. Yeah, like just like how often would these go on?
I could think of 2 or perhaps 3 over the last 5 years. I think some of the challenge is that our business license bylaw hasn't been specific enough. And so with making some of the changing to the wording, there is likely that we will have more grounds to finally clearly be able to say you are operating out of compliance. So those occasions may arise, but the other thing too is that when somebody comes to us and applies for a license, we may determine that the way they're applying is out of compliance with the bylaw. They are provided the opportunity to change their plan and come into compliance prior to continuing to operate the way they are. So by no means is it an immediate suspension. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, we do seek compliance, is voluntary compliance is the ultimate goal. So
I got a couple more here, just a couple comments. Let's see, the permits required for business use of public property, and in down in 7.1, you mentioned the public markets and the vendors, and that they would require a business. And then you mentioned something about being inspecting their properties for fire safety. I just wanted if that was connected there. Is that what you're saying?
well, see, one of the things we are required to do fire inspections for businesses, and they're prioritized based on level of risk. So let's say we have somebody in the public market that perhaps is creating pottery or doing something that involves what could be categorized as high risk out of their home. It's still important, even though they're not based out of a brick and mortar business space somewhere in the downtown core, that they're operating in accordance with the fire codes to ensure their safety, the safety of their property, and the safety of their neighbors. So by having people go through the business licensing process, it puts people on the radar so that we can fit the ones that need to into that level of priority and figure out which ones should have a follow-up safety inspection. So just, I mean, with fire and life safety, the Fire Services Act would indicate that anytime we saw something that we felt was a safety concern, the power is there to go and do a fire safety inspection. This is just another, there's all sorts of reasons for having all businesses getting business licenses for data collection and just making sure that all those steps are done.
Yeah. I mean, personally, just to comment on that as a business owner, you know, many businesses, the idea that, you know, if you need a business license for an at-home business out of your own home, and then having you know, nobody's coming into your home, it's your own deal, even whether it's a garage or something like that, then having to have the residence inspected, it does strike me as, I don't know, I'm just a little wary of it, that's all. I just know so many people who have home-based businesses. It just, anyway, that's just it's a bit, it's a yellow flag for me.
For certain. And I mean, the best context I can put it in is, let's just say, for instance, you lived in a duplex and your next door neighbor was selling deep fried donuts that were made in their garage. I think you would sleep better knowing that they had had a safety inspection to know that everything that they were doing was completely safe, and that I certainly would. And I think that's what we're looking at, is just making sure that people are protected. It's not, when it comes to safety inspections, it's nothing more than that.
Mm-hmm. Just you know, I'm going to give you one more comment because I'm taking too much time. But the 30 days for the business license to get in any missing documents, I notice, I've noted for many years that that often the business license, well, they expire on December 31st. There's an extensive staff closure of a couple weeks plus 2 holidays, major holidays of the year, and it can be quite a frantic time. So that 30 days can be, you know, if there is something that goes wrong, then I don't know. It's just a tough. I agree with it in principle. It's just that I know what it's like to have, you know, that crunch at Christmas and New Year's when there's a big staff closure on getting the business license renewal. That's my only comment.
Understandable. We did have hundreds of people that renewed beginning in November. And what we find a lot of the time, and I'm sure our business license inspector could speak to this as well too, is that we have many business owners that vacation for large parts of the winter and leave right after Christmas and those sorts of things. And it's really challenging to connect with them for the next few months. And because of the demand on resources, the sooner we can tighten things up and bring people into compliance, the better off we are. It allows us to focus on the people wanting to open a new business. So we really do need everyone's participation to try and move more swiftly through the process.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I am okay with it. I just I think maybe, like, as long as we get the message out, I hate to treat adults like children, but you know, need lots of reminders. Anyway, thanks very much for this. This good stuff.
Thanks very well. And are there other comments or questions for Chief Baker? Councillor Steer.
Right. Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Chief Baker. Once again, I concur with Councillor McMaster. The direction that you're going on, this tremendous amount of work, and in principle, like everything I'm seeing. I had, it seems like 4.1b, the power to suspend, cancel, or refuse business licensing, was a popular one among councillors, because that's where some of my questions lie, but I think they were mostly answered in principle. The one area that you did ask for feedback on, and I would like to comment, was on the business licensing on public property, and the whether by resolution or through staff. And my preference would be that it remained with council in the resolution process. And I appreciate the comments around the staff would have the ability to do that in expedient. My only concern would be that is that it would, in essence, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the types of businesses that might be looking at being on public property, and with the sort of the strategic plans, the priorities that council puts forward, the types of businesses I think would be important for council to see and recognize what types of businesses might be allowed on public property, and not to have to put that sort of pressure on staff. So I would like it to stay within the council resolution process personally. And that and I just a quick question on that. Over the years, and I'm trying to think, I don't know if there's been one since in the almost 4 years on council now. What are there? Do you have an approximate number of what those might look like over your 5 years of being being in your position?
Well, I think there are some that have existed for years, but we've never really thought about it. But for instance, the province and the federal government taking a closer look at it, surf schools operating in public property. We had the letters that came to council last year about the Wiccan doing crab cookouts on Chesterman Beach. That would be a business that is wanting to make use of public space for their business. We've had caterers wanting to do, not necessarily caterers. We've had some businesses that have wanted to provide prearranged meals on the beach for clients and things like that. So there's just seems to be more and more different ones. Similar to the way there's more events that are coming out nowadays that want to make use of public space. And so this is where that question of how much does council want to be involved in that process? I believe, and I don't believe that anyone's here necessarily to correct me, so I'll just, caution myself that I may not be 100% accurate, but I believe in the special events permit on public property, it goes to council if it's 12 persons or more, I believe, for approval. So it may just depend, and this is where it could be open for council to say, yes, we want to leave it in the hands of the business license inspector because some of these things feel as though they're really minor and they've been going on for years, or maybe we just want to have a council discussion as a whole and sort of broad scope it, or we want to talk about every individual one.
I was just wondering about what numbers might look like to like I said, just get it done. I was under the impression that it's so in all public properties, not just municipal properties, that you would be referring to. Obviously, you made that clear. So thank you, appreciate that. And then if I could just I just wanted to comment to thank you for adding the compliance with Transport Canada under 7.8. I know that we don't have the ability to go down there, but I do think it's important to have that in that business regulation because it does point to the responsibilities. And we know over the years, the number of incidences directly related to those kinds of infractions. And just having that always at the forefront. Thank you very much for including that in there. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Steer and Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you. Thank you for this, Mr. Baker. I follow up on Councillor Steer's question about the public spaces. Would that include surf schools, for example? Would that be another? So they would have a business license for the business and then a business license to. You're nodding. That's a yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the businesses that would be involved here. I mean, you can look at them however you like, but when it does take place in public, it does consume space. There is garbage that has to be dealt with. There is use of water. There's all sorts of things that affects the overall operations. And so this is just one of those areas that we do need to look at and make sure we have a process in there and take a closer look at.
Okay, and then in regards to the markets and the home businesses, I am supportive of them being included. I think it is important. I understand you haven't decided on what sort of fee that would be, but making sure that it's not cost prohibitive as they're small businesses. But I did like your explanation with the kiln, because as a landlord, I once got asked that, and I was not sure about the business safety of having a kiln in my house. So I definitely don't think it's I think that was a good example, I guess what I'm saying.
I appreciate that. And, part of the business license process is that if you're not the owner of the home, you have to have sign off from the owner that you can operate your home-based business. And so we do get questions from homeowners of, this person wants to do this or that. And it's important that if we're going to give them, good information as to whether or not it's safe, that we take those precautions. And
thank you.
Thank you. And are there other questions from council members? Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thanks for this, Brent. My questions was around the public markets. I'm just wondering how they really function. There's the vendors that sign up for the whole year. But there would be vendors, I imagine, that only want to participate in one market or just occasionally. Would they need to get a business license, or is it possible for the market to have business licenses that maybe could be shared for some of the stalls or something like that?
Yeah, great question. It would really only apply to those that are reserving a space for the season, which is a majority of them. There are spaces that are left open intentionally for walk-ins or one-time onlys, that sort of thing. There are children that show up and want to sell their handmade crafts and things like that. They would not be required to get business licenses for just a one-time. If somebody comes in from out of town and takes the chance on getting a spot at the market, if they meet the market's criteria, they're only there for one day, they're not going to be required to get a business license. So we're just looking at the ones that have set up, this is their business plan for the year, as they are going to do every one of these markets. And so those are the ones that we're focusing on. they are
Okay.
part of our business community.
Okay, thanks. I imagine that same sort of rules would apply to the winter markets or those other markets. Are we just talking about our Village Green market? Basically?
I'm have been trying for a little bit to connect with the Tofino market folks to try and get an idea of what their process is. The winter market, I believe, is often a one-day market, so that might be a completely different question because it's not an ongoing thing and may bring different one-time vendors. So my goal is to be able to work with them, their input and their application process to get a better feel for it before we have the next version of this in April for council. But
yeah, I just don't, my concern is just putting a damper on that creative energy in the community, and a lot of artisans, some dependent are totally dependent on it and some participate occasionally, but I don't want to make it over-regulated so that those occasional artisans feel like it's too hard to participate in Tofino.
agree.
Okay. The other, I guess, question that came up from other councillors too was delegating the authority to staff to refuse a business license. Just by way of comment, I guess I would say I see the necessity of that when something needs to be done quickly, but for a longer process, I think it's best if it comes back to council and the old method. That's used really, really rarely, and all the time I've seen, it's probably only been used, I don't know, maybe half a dozen times over 20 years or something. It's it's a bit of a process, but it's also, I think, it gives some real sense of how critical a matter it is to refuse someone's business license, that it can't be just done at the staff level too. So I think in some cases it's important to be timely and refuse a business license quickly. In other cases, it should be done in a well-considered and longer process. So that's my comments.
Thank you.
And that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Mayor Law has a comment question.
Yeah, just to go back to Councillor Steer's comment on the public business use of public property, and I think if we're also talking about beaches, noting that there's an ongoing new process with the province, I would like to be able to keep that at the council level, at least for the time being. Maybe revisit it later. That would be my preference. And just another further comment with for Councillor Anderson's comment on the public markets is, I know a lot of kids, especially at Christmas or sometimes in the summer, they make things and sell them, and that's a big deal for them. So just to note that maybe excluding minors from having a business license or needing a business license, and then really, as Councillor Anderson says, fleshing out who it is that needs a license and how many times they show up or what they're doing, like artisans. That's it for me.
And I guess I would just add a couple of things. We've gone through this fairly diligently, and I just want to say I appreciate your attention to detail. In particular, I think that 30-day limit is a good idea, having been a victim of that before. So I would, once you forget, you don't forget again. So I think the 30-day limit to get all the materials in is a good idea. And I agree with Mayor Law that I don't know if we can change the timing, because it is quite difficult at Christmas with staff on holidays or the office closed. It is hard to get all those things in on a December 31st deadline. So maybe that's something to think about. I particularly appreciate the posted notices of suspension, or I'm not saying I like that, but I think it's important that we are just showing our due diligence. So I think that's a good idea. and in regards to the public property, my question is, since we're talking about provincial, so we're talking about public property that is municipal, provincial, and potentially federal. Like, how does this apply to other things in our district that are on federal public property? Or are we just saying it's municipal and provincial? That's my question about that. And the last question I had was, has there ever been in our history or a history of other municipalities, caps on business licenses? If there's too many restaurants, I don't know, it's kind of a red herring question, but I'm just thinking about all eventualities or possibilities. If there's too much of something, is there ever a consideration to limit that, or that isn't even a question that we want to consider? So I'll stop there and just pose the question about the public property on other lands other than municipal, provincial, and the idea of a cap in the future.
I think we're primarily looking at municipal property. There are areas where it kind of spans multiple jurisdiction there, where we have expectations of enforcement and garbage cleanup and things like that, similar to, for instance, the beaches. So we look at those areas in our parks and our trails as far as the public property. Caps on licenses, my suspicion that our legal advice would be that we can't put a cap on that, but it's certainly something that we can inquire about. But and I'm sorry, there was a third one that you. Perhaps not.
You're muted, Councillor Thicke.
Sorry, just that I was concurring that your attention to detail on the false declaration or the posted notices was, I'm very pleased to see that there's been a lot of loopholes that have been closed in, and I think it just, yeah, kudos to staff and our legal team to just notice those things, and I think it just will bode well for all of us to be a bit more diligent about, the businesses that we run within the district. So yeah, just thank you for that. Are there any other questions from council to staff or council to council that we need to consider before we finish this discussion? So seeing none, again, thank you to Chief Baker for your presentation, and look forward to your next rendition of this.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So moving on to item 9, unfinished business. Just looking to the CAO and to our mayor. Are there any items of unfinished business?
I have no unfinished business in front of me that the committee needs to consider tonight.
Thank you. And item 10, question period to Ms. Best. Are there any folks in the audience who are signed up for the Q&A to council?
Chair, thank you there, Thicke. There is one from Miss Leanne Unger. So Leanne, I'm going to allow you to speak. You have up to 2 minutes to ask a question to council. Please state your name, your address, and the item you are asking a question on the agenda about.
Hi there. Can you all hear me? Fantastic. So thanks very much for allowing my question. So I'm Leanne Unger. I'm at 355 Neal Street in Tofino, and I just have a quick question in regard to the presentation that James Rodgers made. I'm just wondering if Mayor and Council, if you would be able to clarify what the process is in moving forward. Is like after topics are discussed at committee of the whole, does it go to the next council meeting, or could you clarify that for me?
Yeah, I can. Well, Mayor Law, would you like to take that question initially?
You go ahead. Go ahead, Chair.
Yeah, well, Thank you, Leon, for the question. Generally, the committee of the whole isn't a place where decisions are made, but motions are made that then move forward to council. And in this instance today, we've decided, I think, or we've discussed the fact that there's many things that we need to get into place in order to move the discussion forward. So I'm not, certainly it's very much top of mind, but as you heard in the discussion today, there's our own bylaws to consider. There's, as Councillor Anderson pointed out, there's also matters of importance related to the strategic plan, and then there's the budget process. So there's quite a few moving pieces, and certainly, as Councillor Chalmers also alluded to, this is not something that's going to fall off the desk, but this is a place, this meeting tonight is a place for discussion and finding out more information. And in the month or two to come, it will come back to council, and you will be hearing more about decisions that council makes in light of all the considerations I just listed.
Great, thanks for that clarity. I'm not sure how question period it works here. Can I ask another question, or am I limited to one?
Yeah, I mean, I'll ask the confidential secretary, Ms. Beth, but I believe it would be fine.
Thank you, Chair Thicke. When there is no other participants requesting to ask questions, then we would just return back to the speaker list. So Ms. Unger, there's no other requests for questions. So you are welcome to ask a second one.
Great, thank you. It's a simple one. Just to, there was the conversation about animal bylaws in Tofino, and I just want to make sure that because it was prior to some of the current council's tenure, we actually, the Care Network did develop a series of recommendations on bylaws. I think it was a few years ago now, but there could very well be some really good relevant points in there to consider. But yeah, just because Councillor Thicke, we certainly did take the WAG, their bylaws into consideration when we were looking at that, because we too think those are pretty darn good. Yeah,
thank you. And I think that I don't think I can answer that question fully now, but I think the manager of protective services is also listening, and will be able to answer that question as part of the fuller discussion. So thank you for the question and just your interest in this matter. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks very much to all of you.
Thank you. So if there's no further questions, Ms. Best, am I correct in assuming that?
Thank you, Chair Thicke. You are correct.
Then I think we can move to item 11, which is adjournment. Can someone make a motion? Yes, so moved by Councillor McMaster, seconded by Councillor Chalmers, that the meeting of the Committee of the Whole be adjourned for March the 14th. All in favor? Thank you all. Appreciate it.